Okay, first of all, thanks for the very generous introduction, and thanks for the invitation to come here and speak. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. And finally, also thanks to George for taking time to comment on the book. So I hope you're ready, all of you, for around 40 minutes of new liberalism. Here it is. I'll a few slides. It will right away try to shift to the next one. No. That's it. There we are. Okay. So, in the last 20 years or so, there's been a huge academic and political discussion of neoliberalism, broadly understood as the defining political paradigm of the Western world since the 70s. This discussion has, as many of you probably noticed, been characterized by profound confusion concerning what neoliberalism is, where it comes from, and what role it had actually played in political reforms. Now, for a long time, neoliberalism simply denoted the Anglo-Saxon model of free markets, deregulation, and anti-statism. However, in recent years, the term has often been applied much broader and much more uncritically as a catch-all notion for everything that we, and perhaps in particular the left wing, dislike about modern society. So in reaction, the notion has been criticized for being too broad and politically loaded to own any kind of analytical value whatsoever. So in fact, some critics, they argue that we should stop using the label altogether. Let's see. Yeah. So at the same time, scholars of neoliberalism, to whom I count myself, we have arrived at a constructed consensus about some of its essential features. So three things, I think, are particularly important. First of all, as stated here, we agree on a basic definition of neoliberalism. In brief, boiled down, neoliberalism concerns the ambition to use the power of the state or of any other political institution to create societal orders that are based on free markets, individual freedom, and the competition mechanisms. Hence, the link between the strong political institutions and the free market is key to any understanding of and any investigation into neoliberalism. It's not simply about free markets or about laissez-faire. That's quite important. That's a start point. Now, secondly, scholars tend to agree on let's say, a basic chronology concerning the history of neoliberalism that involves at least three stages. So, as for the first stage, as an ideology and movement, neoliberalism dates all the way back to the interwar era, where self-identified liberals, they wanted to renew liberalism and to use the state as a key tool to set up and to protect free markets. So we also know, and this is the second step, that neoliberalism was widely disseminated in the interwar era, that's not true, in the post-war era, by the so-called Marketization society. And that's a transnational association of economists, intellectuals, and business leaders that was founded by the Austrian emigre economist Friedrich von Hayek in 1947 with the explicit aim to renew liberalism. So this work, we know from several studies, became associated with a range of academic institutions, with platforms, political platforms, with think tanks. It had its first results, so to say, in post-war Germany, in the early Federal Republic, where German neoliberals, they constructed, let's say, the theoretical groundwork of the so-called social market economy that was crucial to the reconstruction of the German economy. So altogether, this network, the Marketization Society, contributes to the global reshaping and diffusion of free market thought when, and this is the third stage, neoliberalism achieved its political breakthrough with Margaret Thatcher and with Ronald Reagan in the 80s. So just to sum up, neoliberalism has a long prehistory. It didn't just emerge out of the blue. Now thirdly, as noted, scholars agree on certain effects of neoliberalism. We know in detail from several investigations how neoliberalism in many regions and countries have resulted in processes of privatization, outsourcing, and deregulation. And we also know how it has eroded what we might call traditional democratic values and practices in these reform processes, which tend to focus on creating economic growth rather than on establishing, or let's say reinforce, mechanism of collective decision-making. But how, we might ask, has neoliberalism become so successful? How has it rallied popular support as a political paradigm? And why does it persist today, in spite of the widespread critique that has been launched against the paradigm, in particular since the crisis in 2008? So I think these questions have rarely been asked in existing research, but they have served as a motivation for my recent book. There, and I also brought a copy here, you can look at it afterwards, on the sovereign consumer. So what I try to do with this book is to offer what I call a new intellectual history of neoliberalism by arguing that neoliberalism as an ideology and as a political practice is closely linked to the creation of a specific citizen ideal, the sovereign consumer. And I argue that this ideal of the sovereign consumer has been at the heart of the ways in which neoliberals have constructed and also legitimized, justified their ideals of modern society ever since the interwar era, ever since neoliberalism was formulated. So let me just immediately stress, this sovereign consumer is not a real individual in flesh and blood. It's an imagined figure. So more specifically, neoliberals invented this idea of individuals as critical, independent, and ultimately sovereign consumers who secures not only economic efficiency, but also democratic institutions by choosing freedom between available goods on the market, but also in politics. So this, as I'll elaborate on, this invention of the sovereign consumer hinged on the idea of democracy as a method of choosing and involved in reinvention of the market as the key democratic form par excellence. So the argument I'll try to unfold in the next 38 minutes, I think I'm left for 35 minutes, is that the success of neoliberalism is to be found in claims to democratic legitimacy that is associated with free consumer choice. And also that this has led to the implementation of a new political economy of consumer choice that aims to marketize the political. Now in my book, I try to unfold this argument in 6 chapters that include nation-specific, comparative and transnational perspectives, North America, Central Europe, Scandinavia, throughout the 20th century. Of course, we don't have time for that today, so I thought that I would focus here on the very birth of neoliberalism and the figure of the sovereign consumer in the interwar period. Now I'll try to focus on whom I identify as the very inventor of the neoliberal paradigm, and that is the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, whose idea of neoliberalism as a popular program has been crucial to its development. And I should say that during my talk, I dive into detailed, specialized intellectual history. I hope you bear with me, and then perhaps in the discussion we can sort of zoom out on the more general picture. Okay, of course you need to have a picture of Ludwig von Mises. Here it is. So Ludwig von Mises, he occupies a complex place in research on neoliberalism. As it says here, that's actually a quote, his own quote here. He's on the one hand often portrayed as a so-called classical liberal, with reference to his strong commitment to laissez-faire economics. So he's famous for arguing that only a policy of free markets, private property, and a minimal state can create a society of economic growth, peace and individual freedom. But on the other hand, scholars, to whom I count myself, have begun to portray Mises as a key figure in the rise of neoliberal thought, not classical liberal, neoliberal thought, due to his novel ideas and influence on several key neoliberal thinkers from the 20s onwards. Now, one of these scholars is Quinn Solodian, who wrote this book, Globalism, The End of Empire and the Birth of Neoliberalism. That is the most cited and discussed book in the field. No matter where I go in the world, no matter what field I'm in the 20th century and the present day, people debate this book. It's a book everybody loves, whether you come from the left, the right, you're a neoliberal or a socialist. And why? I think it's because it's quite precise and tries to be non-normative in the account of neoliberalism. So, in the book, Quinn argues that neoliberalism began in the 1920s, when after World War I, and on the ashes of the Hamburg Empire, Mises and other neoliberals, they joined forces, or other liberals joined forces, in order to rethink neoliberalism and to reorder capitalism on a global scale. That's the title of the list. So in doing so, they turned to international institutions to provide a regime that guaranteed property rights and international division of labor. More specifically, they aimed to legally safeguard capitalism's market mechanisms from all kinds of political interference, democratic disruptions, and also social discontent. This was the era of mass politics. So according to Quinn, just going to tell a little bit about his book here. These neoliberal policy prescriptions, they have two sides. To open for the world market through the free flow of capital, of goods, and of labor, and to make internal changes needed to compete internationally. So on a global scale, neoliberals such as Mises fought against obstacles that could be tariffs, for example, to secure free markets. Forthright advocates for the needs of business that did so in the service of and in collaboration with interest organizations. On the domestic front, the primary obstacle to free market was posed by organized labor. And clearly, we know that there's no doubt about this. Mises found it legitimate to mobilize the state to remove this obstacle. This is the need to use the state to create markets and protect them. Tellingly, according to his biographer, he appreciated the Austrian government's violent suppression of the general strike in Vienna in 1927, and as an advisor to the authoritarian Engelbert Dollfuss, he approved of the latter's crushing of labor and democratic forces in 1934. So he was ready to take measures to set up and protect the free markets. So altogether, Mises was crucial in, let me just see if that's up there, is that at the roof? Well, it's there still. A so-called hardcore neoliberalism that draws on the force of political institutions and the state. A hardcore neoliberalism where free markets and business rights trump democratic rights. They outline what another, let's say, historian Jan Miller calls constrained democracy. That is a democracy where the economic order is encased from mass politics. For Mises, this order was, for example, to be insulated from popular claims to distribution. And it was even legitimate to refuse sustenance to those in need. You didn't want the state to take care of much else than to secure free markets. It was also legitimate to intervene supranationally, for example, in uncivilized countries who did not adapt to the free market international regime. So that was a little bit about Quinn as a platform to my own. Because I think Globalist is a really good book, one of the best available. But I think something is missing. in this and other accounts of neoliberalism. It holds no explanation of why the neoliberal paradigm became popular. It's a simple description. There's no illumination of the legitimacy that allowed for its implementation. Why, we might ask, should politicians, scholars, intellectuals, and the population at large embrace this paradigm vis-a-vis other paradigms? For some people, it might even sound somewhat radical, depending on your viewpoint. But I think to answer this question, we need to highlight how Ludwig von Mises, from the outset in the 20s, invented neoliberalism as a popular program that was invested with popular appeal and also with legitimacy. And in doing so, we might refer to another scholar, British sociologist, Niklas Olsen, who also sees Mises as one of the inventors of the neoliberal paradigm. But he provides a slightly different perspective than Slobodian. According to Gay, Mises was important for, I quote here, for setting an agenda that was primarily economic rather than political in basis. And he adds, I continue to quote, this new or neoliberalism was in its earliest form, that is with Mises, both a defensive project that sought to conserve the principles of individual freedom that have been central to classical forms of liberalism, and a positive program that emphasized the powers of the free market and the importance of economic choice. End of quote. So I want to use this quote here to argue that Mises' program that emphasized the powers of the free market and the significance of economic choice. I want to propose that was linked to the invention of the sovereign consumer as the key driver of the neoliberal market. But let me just give you some background before I delve into Mises' program. So Mises' program responded to, first of all, to the current crisis of liberalism in the interwar era, caused by the fact that the ideology since the end of the 19th century had been increasingly associated with negative developments and values, such as exploitation of the working class, monopolism, elitism, and also anti-democratic sentiments. And after World War I, also with economic crisis. So this criticism intensifies in the interwar period, where many describe liberalism as a very fragile ideology that was unable to sustain a legitimate political order in the age of modernity and mass politics. So at this time, liberal ideology was modified, it was abandoned, and it was also reinvented by people who called themselves liberals, including Ludwig von Mises, and in particular in this book, Socialism, from 1921, I think it was. So, I think it's important, the context. One is a crisis of liberalism, the other one is planned economies. Because Mises' program also answered a quite specific, raging political debate that arose after World War I and the rise of the new Russian regime, about whether a socialist government with control of the means of production and distribution could do as good or even better than a capitalist one in respect to allocating goods in an efficient and just manner. Ludwig von Mises, he outright rejected such postulates in this book and other writings in the 20s. He argued that the socialist system, they have a so-called calculation problem due to their inability to determine prices, resulting from the fact that production of goods is directed by central authority and not by consumer demand made on a free market. He also argued that for these reasons, socialist plan for the allocation of the means of production was inferior to liberal capitalism in terms of efficiency and productivity. Just going to take a sip of water. Moreover, he argued, I quote, that the law of the production is the consumer, and that all production must bend to the will of the consumer in capitalism. Now, I think the importance of statements such as these that cannot be overestimated. Let me just break it down into some details for you. To begin with, it effectively answered those who criticize liberalism for its lack of a clear source of societal order by investing the liberal order with a new symbol of authority, the sovereign consumer who decides who's to do what in the liberal order. Moreover, by referring to the general public as sovereign consumers, that's you and me, he invested liberalism with a particular notion of popular sovereignty that was required. This is the age of mass politics in the early 20th century. So this notion of popular sovereignty rested on the demands of ordinary people and not on the narrow demands, let's say it like that, of those in power of centralized planned economies or of those owners of the means of production. So as such, Mises, he effectively rebutted the Marxist critique of capitalism as a system that only serves or holds those who are endowed with production resources, let's say like that. So in more general terms, endowed with the freedom to choose, the sovereign consumer personified a deeply individualist society. But, Mises added, and this is very important, according to him, a regime run by sovereign consumers would nevertheless ensure an efficient and a democratic society. As for efficiency, he argued that, which I already mentioned, that consumer decisions most effectively allocate productive resources in society. In his view, it's simply impossible for some central authority to have an overview of all our individual demands and desires and to produce what we want in the right quantity, to give it a price. To sort of have an overview of that would be impossible. It would lead to a system of inefficiency and waste because the system would just produce a lot of things that people might not want anyway and put on the wrong price because people are willing to pay something else for it. So for democracy, this was an economy, according to Mises, run by the people, again run by you and me as sovereign consumers, pointing to what we want to have on the market. It was made up by the sum of our individual decisions on the marketplace, not by the decisions made by people in central authority government agencies on our behalf. So this infusion of liberalism with new democratic legitimacy ran very deep in Mises' book. It aimed to counter this broad criticism of liberalism as an elitist project that sought to defend its values from the influence of the masses by insulating these masses from the democratic process. In line with this, Mises argued that the market in fact offered a superior solution to securing the individual citizens' representation and participation in societal processes. And he did so by making an often quoted analogy between the market and democratic politics that I put here. He says, from this point of view, the capitalist society is a democracy in which every penny represents a ballot paper. It's a democracy with an imperative and immediately revocable mandate to its deputies. It's a consumerist democracy. End of quote. Moreover, as already indicated, Mr. Mises justified liberal capitalism by contrasting it always to the socialist order. That's sort of the other. He argued that in socialist planning, the government would be a dictatorship in which those in power pursued their own interests and repressed desires held by the rest of the population. So altogether, Mises he defended and he legitimized liberal capitalism by redescribing it as a well-ordered, rational, and also democratic system driven by the wants of ordinary people. It was, he said, and I quote again, the true economic democracy. So to sum up this book, Socialism, it provided a positive program of liberalism that aimed to counter the idea of it as an elitist and anti-democratic project and reject the idea of state intervention in the economy. It would do no good, it would be inefficient, it would be undemocratic, according to Mises. So crucial here was the analogy that he made between the market and democratic politics, right here. In reconciling liberalism and democracy, the analogy reinterpreted the very meaning of democracy at the time by shifting it from the political to the economic realm. So according to him, markets simply express the popular will more articulately and more meaningfully than do mere elections, according to Mises. To be sure, Mises did not reject the ideal of parliamentary democracy. You don't find that in his writings. But he claimed that it served mainly as a tool to make peace, here I quote again, to make peace. So in contrast to parliamentary democracy, he portrayed the daily voting on the marketplace as the real driver of individual representation and participation in society. As such, he also sought to reclaim and move forward the liberal agenda on political grounds, but in a way that rehabilitated the market on behalf of, let's say, traditional sides of democracy, and gave primacy to the economic rather than the political. He thereby created an ideological tradition that aimed to disenchant politics by economics through what we can call a re-enchantment of the market and its virtues. This was crucial, argued in the book, to his positive program of neoliberalism. So let me jump a little bit in time. This was sort of the core argumentative bit. Now we sort of move forwards and upwards and zoom out a little bit. So this sovereign consumer have ever since Mises served as a key figure in the legitimation of the neoliberal project. As I tried to show in the book, virtually every neoliberal proponent of the ideology have portrayed free consumer choice as a defining feature of the market economy, and this sovereign consumer as an agent who's capable of generating economic efficiency and political democracy through her or his free choice. Moreover, they have criticized socialism according to its lack of capacity to fulfill consumer wants. So portraying politics as a choice between liberal capitalism and socialist planning is a key element of neoliberal thought. So here we have another quote by Hayek, perhaps the most famous proponent of neoliberal ideology, who also makes this distinction between liberal capitalism and socialist planning in 1935 in the social calculation debate with reference to the consumer. But I could take up any other neoliberal you'd like me to mention. It's there every time. So during the 20th century, I have to add, neoliberals have disagreed about how the neoliberal order should be designed and also how to define the state's function in this order. And they have also pointed to problems that, according to them, characterize a market order based on consumer sovereignty. And that was especially after the Great Depression that somehow eroded almost all remaining support for free markets. And here, many self-declared liberals began to argue that laissez-faire was to be abandoned if liberalism was to be saved from a crisis. It was also at this time they agreed on neoliberalism, actually as a term for the new and more state-focused ideology movement. This is one of the reasons why today we call it neoliberalism, is actually because they did so themselves in 1938. They had a meeting in Paris where they decided on neoliberalism as the label for their ideological labels. Anyway, in this context, some of the more, let's say, market-critical neoliberals, who wanted not only to use the state to create competition, but also to remedy what they saw as its negative consequences, i.e. inequality, monopolism, and so on and so forth, they pointed to three deficiencies in the consumer-driven order, and I put them here too. So the first is that votes in the marketplace is not equally distributed as in politics. And why not? Well, because people, they have unequal purchase power. I mean, some people have more euro or dollars than others. There's simple inequality. It might be, at least. Secondly, it might be that individuals are not entirely rational in making their choices when they're buying their goods. They might actually be influenced by external factors, such as advertising. We all know that ourselves, perhaps. And thirdly, it might also be that a free market tends to be dominated by monopolistic big business that decides what we can buy. So we don't have consumer sovereignty, we have producer sovereignty. To take a present-day example, we can choose between Apple or Microsoft or something like that, critics would say. So because of these deficiencies, a lot of neoliberals in the 30s, actually most of them, argue against Mises and for the need of state intervention in economic and social life, including regulation, distribution of the economy, consumer protection mechanisms, and also public institutional mobilization of consumers, and all this to create an equal, free, and democratic liberal society. But in my book, I sort of make this rather sweeping argument that what I call a Misesian idea, I mean the ideas from Mises, won out in the long run and came to function as a major driver in what I call a wide-ranging transformation of political thinking and also political practice that has taken place since the 60s and increasingly since the 80s. So prioritizing the marketplace over traditional democracy became the shared aim of neoliberal ideology and practice. Hence, the consumer democracy they identified with the market economy came to represent an analogy pertaining only to economic processes, or mostly to economic processes, and not to a political order based on traditional democratic institutional measures. So in this process, I argue, neoliberals have largely subordinated traditional political values to the narrow pursuit of economic ideals by decoupling visions of efficiency, utility, and growth from the promotion of rights, participation, and democracy. Okay, I'm coming to an end, and I'll just say that, of course, you'll have to read the book if you want to have all the details from the 20s until today. I think I'll just finish off by jumping to the 80s, where the variants of this neoliberal rationality of political economy arguably became somewhat hegemonic across the political spectrum in much of the Western world. At least this is what I try to claim. I would like to point to two traditionally non-neoliberal institutions which paved the way for the spread of this neoliberal rationality of political economy. So first, I think it's quite clear in Denmark, Scandinavia, Great Britain, United States, and many other countries, that center-left parties, they help push this political economy by incorporating the idea of government as unable to respond to individual demands into their ideological practice. They began to argue that the individual's capacity to shape her or his own life was much better fulfilled by market forces than by protections offered by state institutions. Thus, they pushed a new understanding of state institutions, of markets and individuals, and of the desired relations between these three phenomena by stating, similar to neoliberals, that we as sovereign consumers are harmed by state regulation and best protected by our individual rationality and by the efficiency of the market. But center-left parties, we know that in Denmark at least, in Great Britain, the United States, elsewhere, not only follow in the footsteps of neoliberal ideologies by pursuing politics, marketization, deregulation, they also expanded their ambition by framing the sovereign consumer as a motive and a tool for public sector reforms, largely known as new public management. So this involved an attempt to re-enchant the public sector by modeling it in the mirror of the market and by portraying the citizen as a customer and capital. Anyway, I would just like to add that this new center-left policies were in line with developments, and that's the second thing I would like to say, in post-war economics, which increasingly began to question the role of the state as a collective decision maker and social planner, and elevated consumer sovereignty into the only norm according to which societal well-being could be measured. And I have an entire chapter where I try to show this on economic textbooks, and I try to look at choice structures and discourses in that. So I try to show that many economists came to share the belief that the challenges to creating the good society are located in the flaws of state institutions and the actions of people in charge of them, rather than in capitalism. So this belief is strongly rooted in the idea, prevalent in neoliberalism and also in much economics, that self-interest is the driving force of human activity. So according to this idea, people only enter government institutions to maximize their own utility, and we only vote and so on and so forth, and not because we are dedicated to ideals of the common good. So against this background, economists and politicians want to push political decisions onto the market, which they portray as a sign of social interaction that will bring us what the state cannot deliver: efficiency, freedom, entrepreneurship, and democracy. In other words, I argue at least what once was a neoliberal invention has become a mainstream rationality in politics and academia. And the final slide, on my final page, a few words on neoliberalism, choice, and democracy. So, seen from the perspective of tradition, you can see this from different perspectives. I think that's quite important. Seen from the perspective of, let's say, traditional democratic values institutions, one would say that the rhetoric of choice and neoliberalism is somewhat deceptive. I mean, it's impossible to be against the idea of free choice. We don't want to have free choice, we all do. But in reality, many people today actually have very little money to spend, and also a few goods to choose between in an economy that is dominated by equality, and also, some places, big business. It's also seen from this perspective of traditional democratic values institutions, a rhetoric that might erode our ability to make collective demands for social and democratic rights. For sure, neoliberalism, I think, undoes democracy as we have known it by trying to transform it into a marketplace. But let's shift the perspective around. I think it's quite crucial that if we want to understand, and if people want to criticize it, if you wish to replace neoliberalism with a viable alternative, I think we need to recognize its force as a positive program that also realizes popular support through appeals to democratic legitimacy in a way that challenges traditional notions of democracy. This is, I think, has been and remains the key to the success of neoliberalism. Thanks for listening so long.